So Facebook is now using so-called independent fact checkers to verify news stories on their site. The problem is those fact checkers aren't actually checking any facts, and I know, because in the last 2 weeks I've had 2 separate reports that have been called partly false information. But here's the problem. The reporters from USA Today and PolitiFact, who so-called fact-check my stories, admit they never even bothered to watch them. So what are they basing their fact checks on? And how damaging is this to actual journalism? I think you know. I'm Ben Swann, and this is Truth in Media. Checkers. That's what we're doing today. As I told you, I've had 2 stories that have been flagged on Facebook as partly false information. One of those stories on Instagram is blocked so that people can't see it at all. Now, this is aside from just the typical algorithms that hide my content. It happens all the time to me and to hundreds of other journalists. But in this case, they're actually flagging certain stories because they're picking up traction, and they're claiming that these stories are false news. Now, remember, Facebook has a process that it goes through by having these so-called fact-checking sites as partners. PolitiFact is one of those partners, and so is USA Today. Now, here's the problem. With these 2 stories that I've put up, in both cases, the stories have been flagged as being partly false information, but not because of what's in the story, but based on totally erroneous and other reasons. Let's start with this latest one. It just happened on Saturday from PolitiFact. So PolitiFact decided to do a fact check on this report that I did about the contact tracing bill that's being pushed through. It's H.R. 6666. It's an incredible story and an incredible bill, and it deserves your attention. If you have not seen the story, you got to go try to find it on Facebook or Instagram or YouTube. Even though it's being hidden from you, try to search Ben Swann H.R. 6666 so that you can see it. And the reason for that is because it's such a critically important issue. It's a contact tracing bill that puts $100 billion into tracking the population in the name of preventing coronavirus. Now, I go into a lot of information in this about what's in the bill and what's not in the bill, and also specifically wording that would leave this thing pretty vague and open to interpretation, as well as continued expansion in future years. Just as our government has done with bills like, for instance, the Patriot Act, which was supposed to be, right after 9/11, put into place to protect us against terrorism and has become a permanent part of the American political landscape. And also, the powers of the Patriot Act continue to expand, not retract. We suspect it would be a very similar issue with this contact tracing bill. However, PolitiFact decided that because the story had 100,000 views in less than a day, they needed to do something about it. And they did. PolitiFact has now pegged that story as being false, according to their so-called truth-o-meter. Take a look at this. The May 12 post, which had more than 100,000 views by the next day, was flagged as part of Facebook's efforts to combat false news and misinformation on its news feed. The $100 billion is strictly targeted to fighting COVID-19. It would fund not only contact tracing, a process aimed at stopping the spread of the disease, but also COVID-19 testing and services for people isolating at home, which, by the way, I explained all of that. And what it would do is create a contact tracing program. They're calling it the Trace Act. Now, the wording in this act is actually very short, and it's kind of to the point, but it leaves a lot of room not only for interpretation, but for expansion. And even what it does include in what's written in the text is pretty scary stuff. While it does raise some privacy concerns, contact tracing has been used to slow the spread of other diseases, such as SARS and HIV. It's a common strategy in public health agencies across the country. The post also includes a 15-minute video in which Swann claims that the bill would create a, quote, massive new surveillance structure in this country. It absolutely would. Now, watch this. In the video, which we did not fact-check, Swann argues that the contact tracing is useful only in the early stages of an outbreak and is now completely useless in the United States because a massive amount of the population has been exposed to the disease. Based on that, Swann argues that the contact tracing supported by the bill would be done to monitor you in your own home, traced in your own home, your associations monitored, and your movements monitored. And by the way, every single health official who has talked about contact tracing describes it in exactly that way. And then this PolitiFact little gem ends like this. The bill strictly targets the novel coronavirus. It would provide $100 billion to organizations that do COVID-19 testing or contact tracing, or that provide services to people who are isolating at home. We rate the Facebook post false. So essentially what they're saying is we didn't bother to watch the video or even fact-check the video. We want to take the title and decide that the title itself is false, claiming that the title is the totality of the report. That would be as if you took any headline out of the New York Times or the Washington Post or USA Today or your local newspaper, and you said, I'm going to decide whether or not this article is accurate based on how I interpret the headline, how I interpret the meaning of the headline.